Hello YouTube. Today we're going to talk about managing engineers as a foreigner in Vietnam. So I've lived in Vietnam off and on for about 6 years. And I've been managing teams here for almost 2.5, 3 years, different teams. And I've worked at product companies, small startups. I'm now working at a larger startup, and I've also worked at outsourcing firms based in Vietnam. The first thing to understand, I would say, is that the culture and language barrier is very real, as you might expect, and that is a struggle. Where the Vietnamese are coming from is that most of them have learned a lot from school. They're used to a more teacher-student relationship. They're hoping that the people who are managing them can teach them. And that can be a little bit of a struggle because realistically, especially as you are a director of engineering or head of engineering or something like that over here, you are probably not in the technology enough to be really able to mentor them like a good senior developer would. The problem is that there are very few genuinely senior engineers out here, and everybody's hungry for knowledge. So if you are considering managing a team here, one of the things you may want to negotiate with whoever's looking to hire you to come out here and manage people is making sure that you have the time to brush up on skills and the permission and the budget to bring in external speakers or take people to events or things like that, buy training to help the engineers level up. They're all very, very hungry for that feedback and that information. And if you decide that you can't provide it, then you're going to make them very happy by, one, being really upfront about what you can and can't deliver, right? Making sure to reset expectations, but also bringing in that knowledge and helping them continue to advance. And they're very comfortable with that classroom format because that's what most of them are used to. They don't, in my experience, they don't really like side projects. No one really wants to work on something for a couple of months that won't be used. And so I've seen companies try and keep people happy by giving them an opportunity to work on their skills. But if they work on new skills and new technologies and those things aren't put into production, they feel extremely disappointed and frustrated, even if they learned something. So if that comes up as an option, I would try and avoid it because it tends to make them less happy, even though they may have learned something really important. The other thing is it's really important to build trust here, and it's really easy to lose. One of the things you encounter, especially if you're American, is that you're not used to the level of power differential and cultural resistance to speaking up that you'll see here. Americans tend to be pretty egalitarian. It's not that weird to go talk to your boss or even your boss's boss kind of casually in most engineering environments, at least all the ones I was in when I was in America. But there was a guy I worked with, and he was a junior developer, and I took him to coffee here. And he was really surprised and obviously a little worried. So we sat down, we talked for a while. I could tell he was thinking through this very odd event of a head of engineering taking him to coffee. And then he dropped a bombshell on me. I knew that there was a difference between how we did things in America and here, but he made it very visceral. And he said, at my last job, I would get yelled at if I said anything to the head of engineering without being specifically asked to. So he could not, under any circumstances, talk to his old head of engineering without it being a political problem for him that he said anything. And that is not unusual. I've now worked with a couple different companies. I've befriended engineers outside of my own environment and organization, and this is pretty common. So if you're going to come and work with Vietnamese engineers, especially if you're at a higher level of management, know that they are very concerned about that power differential. They're trying to feel it out. They know you're not from here, and that will excite them, but it will also give them a lot of anxiety. because they're trying to figure out what that means. A lot of them want a more Western style of management, but they're not used to it, and they don't really know how to feel that out. So you have to work really hard on building that level of trust and openness. And this is exacerbated by the language barrier. Now, what I have found works well for the language barrier is to make sure to have verbal FaceTime, but don't count on it. So they want that FaceTime because it means something to them emotionally. But they may not actually understand a whole lot of what you're saying. Their verbal comprehension might be quite weak. So what I do is that I make all my meetings written. I use the Amazon style where I create a big memo that's very well, thoroughly written. And then I give that to all my engineering managers or engineering leads, and I let them read it ahead of time and tell me if there's anything that doesn't translate well or is confusing to someone who's not a native English speaker. And then I make any corrections that they have, any suggestions they have about that document. And it's safe for me to do that because if they're an engineering manager, they're only, one rung below where I am right now. They're my direct reports. There's not a huge power differential as much as if I went to, say, the developers directly, right? And then I make it very clear in the meeting when I will present this memo. I'll send it out ahead of time, right? I'll send out this memo ahead of time. People have multiple days to read it. So they can read it. They can put it through Google Translate. They can ask other engineers. They can ask their manager or their lead for help on making sure that they understand it. And then when we have this meeting, I let them all know that if they do not feel comfortable asking questions or commenting directly for any reason, language, whatever, that they can go to their lead and their lead can ask questions on their behalf, and I'm okay with it. And some will. Some will just go to their engineering lead or engineering manager, and they will not speak to you directly, especially when you start. And some will be brave and speak up. When people speak up, it's really important that you acknowledge it and you thank them for it and honor the fact that for them that's actually pretty anxiety provoking and scary. And so if they do that, reward them, and you'll start seeing more and more energy speaking up and questioning, and you can get a much better working relationship with the engineers. The other thing that Vietnamese tend to like is they like lots of plans. It's at least in the organizations I've worked with, they really, really like knowing that they're doing it right. There is an instinct towards doing a lot of research, planning things out. Again, they may not have access to really senior engineers. They know kind of intuitively that if everyone in the building has 3 years of experience or 4 years of experience, and there are people out there writing books who have 30 years of experience, even if they have the title of senior engineer, they don't really feel that senior. And so they may be very hesitant as a result to put forth a design or architectural decision, even if they feel that it's right, because they are aware of what they don't know. They know they don't know things, right? So they like to plan, they like to do a lot of research sometimes, and you may have to constrain that, or you may have to encourage it depending on where they are. If they're afraid to speak up, encourage them to research and debate. If they're spending too much time doing research and debate because they're afraid of making a mistake, you're going to have to get them to be more agile and run experiments and actually build things a little bit and help coach them through that experience. The other thing that is not common here is for organizations to have clear career progressions. A lot of times the career progression at organizations is basically willy-nilly, whatever you can negotiate. If you have so many years of experience, then you're senior. Doesn't matter what your skills are, doesn't matter about much of anything, that's just how they do it. And so I've seen charts where literally the only qualification for different levels of skill and seniority is the number of years you've been in the industry or your academic qualifications. So engineers here don't really know how to rank themselves globally, and they often don't know what they don't know. So helping them through that and gain that knowledge without it being embarrassing is one of those things that you should make a plan around. So creating a very clear career roadmap and career progression charts and a list of skills and behaviors that you want to see, and ensuring you reward them is a big deal here. Certainly, even in America, there were companies that I worked for that didn't really go through all that formality. But out here, that formality will really help, because it will help them feel safe and clear and understand what's going on. Same thing with technical roadmaps and product roadmaps. Even if you create them, you want to really stress that everything is subject to change and at any moment, because otherwise it will be disturbing. At least for a lot of teams. If they believe that there's some 6-month map of what the future is going to look like, and that map changes, they may get upset. They may feel that it's their fault, they did something wrong. You have to make sure that they understand that that's not the case, that it's normal for things to change. Especially if they're changing for, say, business reasons. So you want to lay out a roadmap, a direction that you're heading, and then do frequent check-ins, which is just good management anyway, but always let them know that things are okay, right? That anything that happens isn't their fault, and always make sure that they know whether they did a good job or not. So they hate not knowing if they did a good job. So in the West, the difference is you might presume that unless someone tells you something, you're probably doing an okay job. Here, they're a little bit more anxious about it, especially if they're working with a foreign manager. They can't read you very well. To give you an example, I sent someone a smile emoji because they did something and I liked it and I was happy, and the engineer asked me what was wrong, and I was like, I just sent you a smile emoji, come on, we're on Slack. And he's like, well, usually people send me a smile emoji when something's wrong, right? And that was one of those learning experiences for me, that sometimes the cultural communication here, or the norms they're used to inside that company, can be radically different than what you expect. And I was actually really appreciative that engineer kind of called out the awkwardness and confusion of that moment, so I could say, hey man, I'm American, I'm really direct. If I'm not happy, I'll just say I'm not happy, and if I'm happy, you'll get a smile emoji, and it's just very straightforward. And he was like, oh, okay, awesome, great. Because they don't know. They don't know if that's the case or not starting out. So kind of to wrap this up, always make sure that you're taking their anxiety into account, because there's usually, at least from the American perspective, quite a bit of it. They are not used to the language barrier. They are not used to the cultural barrier. They are often coming in with unusual expectations of what your role is. They may not have clarity on what their role is in the organization, or what they're being asked of. Even if it's being an engineer, they may not have a lot of clarity on really what's being asked of them, because there's often pretty weak management. And so you've got all these different types of anxiety flowing around. And the number one thing you're going to want to do to help your team function under your leadership is identify where those anxieties are coming from, which ones are dominant, and eliminate them, while also providing some sort of forward path and a direction and a goal for them to hit. If you do all that while understanding them as people and having those conversations, even if they're awkward, you'll do okay. And then with time, they'll open up more and more, and you'll be good. So hope that helps if you decide to come out to Vietnam.